this video I'm going to talk to you guys about the combat fighting stance. So I know that stance is something that has been talked about both ways. It's a thing or it's not necessarily a thing. So one of the ways they explain this is they talk about it in the sense that stance is, standing, the way you stand. And it's basically a way to stand ready and being able to counter the force of the recoil, but also without sacrificing mobility. That's true. That's traditionally what stance is basically for. So I wanted to go ahead and dive into this a little bit more. With my experience, I found that stance is not just something that you use standing, but it actually, the concept of it spreads throughout all positions, because realistically we are the operator of these weapons, and so we are the platform that controls it and operates it, and therefore we are responsible for holding it and controlling it in whatever position that may be. And that's why stance and the ability to counter the forces of the recoil also goes into non-traditional or unconventional positions. So fighting around barriers, doing what you need to, the rice paddy squat or whatever it is, whatever you want to call it, or just doing what you can behind a barrier to manipulate it, that is a form of establishing a stance. And it's just a method of countering the recoil and being able to stabilize that weapon on target. So realistically, I don't see that it's being taught well enough, and I'm not sitting here trying to make an instructional video, but I wanted to relay my concept. And really, that's what I talked about earlier, the ability to counter the force of the recoil without losing mobility. For instance, in standing, the modern isosceles that's used with rifles and pistols, you may not necessarily see how my feet are doing. I'll just go ahead and adjust the camera a bit. Anyways, the typical way to stand is kind of like this. The dominant foot back and the support leg forward, and just countering the force of the recoil, and having a bit of a forward lean. This is a 308, so it may recoil a little bit more than the 5.56. With this PWS CQB compensator, doesn't really recoil all that much, and definitely less shock to your head. But anyways, like with a pistol, you can stand basically straight up and you can counter the force of the recoil just with your arms. But when you have something going directly into your shoulder, you need to take a little bit more of accountability for your stability. And so, like if you're taking a knee and you're leaning around, cover, you need to counter that with this, but still lean forward a little bit, kind of like this. You'll need to counter the recoil. So this is well illustrated when you're shooting a shotgun. You'll have to counter that force. So even when you're going prone, there's a way that you position your legs accordingly to counter the force of the recoil. If I'm laying on my left side and I'm shooting this rifle, I want to have my right leg forward so that I'm not doing this motion after every shot. And so there's ways to also stabilize a pistol when you're in the prone. Just lean over a little bit so you can kind of lock it in position a little bit better, and so on and so forth. So just the camera back, amateur filming here. So anyways, the point here is I feel like we kind of need to change the way we're teaching things and just establish a concept, because what I realized over the years is it's more, we can't go off of fundamentals and principles. We need to leave some flexibility. We need to leave flexibility and allow the shooter to establish something that works for their body type. And maybe if you're working in gear like this, it actually works at the hips, and I have very little on my upper body. However, if you're riding mostly with the plate carrier and maybe like a little battle belt that's a little below this, you're going to be more top heavy. So depending on what gear you have, you need to just keep in mind that you're trying to counter the force of the recoil but not lose mobility. Now, let's go ahead and move into that mobility aspect. The reason why the boxer stance, mixed with the isosceles is so popular is the way that you're holding your feet and bending the knees down is allowing you to brace yourself so you can quickly impulse in either direction and be able to establish a good stance and the ability to immediately get back on target and stabilize yourself, because that's a big thing. You need to stabilize yourself to counter the recoil without sacrificing mobility. Same with the kneeling and getting down into the prone. Now, you can't necessarily go into a prone position if you're trying to get maximum stability. You can't necessarily get down into a prone position that necessarily helps you with mobility. Now, if you're going into a quick prone shooting under a vehicle, there is one hand on the ground, and then you basically impulse up with that hand that you were going down quickly with, like shooting under a vehicle or shooting around cover. You might have a hand on the ground and you're in a low kneeling. You go around barriers like that. That's something that can be done, but it's just an illustration that we're trying not to necessarily lose mobility while we're countering the recoil that is coming. So I feel like we do need to kind of change the way that stance is taught, not necessarily just in a standing manner, but to get the concept, hey, when you're getting into different positions, whether that's standing, leaning, kneeling, prone, squatting, whenever you're going around a barrier and trying to use cover, follow the principles, the new principles of keep in mind you're countering the recoil without basically, immobilizing yourself. So without sacrificing mobility or compromising mobility. So anyways, I hope this video was somewhat, enlightening, but this is just stuff that I picked up over the years, and it's kind of like an epiphany, if you will. It's like, why are we teaching stance as only the standing, but we're also teaching these other positions, and we have fancy ways of holding things. Well, for like leaning around the right side, not to drag this video on, but leaning around the right side, instead of having your left leg way out there, one thing you can do is actually have your left leg kind of diagonal to your right and assist it that way. That actually allows you to lean a little bit more, and you can stabilize yourself, surprisingly, and still have a good lean and have the other leg back, helping you counter that recoil. Conversely, with leaning around this side, you can lean pretty well. Instead of like this, where you're basically squatting down with this leg, which you can do, but you're putting a lot of weight on this leg. Whereas with this, all you need in order to snap back is your abs. So it's just ways of stabilizing yourself and rethinking the way we're teaching stance. So anyways, I appreciate you guys watching. I hope you got something out of this, and hopefully we can start a conversation in the comments if there is a bit of a disagreement, but kind of pushing away from the, the big dogma that's out there from the big gurus. But with that said, I appreciate you guys watching, and you guys have a good one.